After the fighting ended in 1945, the wartime alliance between the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union quickly collapsed. The Soviet Union moved to secure control over Eastern Europe, installing communist governments across the region, while the United States and its allies worked to rebuild and influence Western Europe through programs like the Marshall Plan. What had once been an alliance of necessity turned into a rivalry of opposing ideologies, dividing Europe into two hostile spheres of influence. Unlike World War II, this conflict was not fought through direct battles between the superpowers. Instead, it became a global standoff, driven by politics, ideology, espionage, and the constant threat of nuclear war. The United States and the Soviet Union avoided fighting each other directly, but their competition played out across the world through proxy wars, intelligence operations, and political pressure. The Cold War reshaped the modern world. It split the globe into rival blocs, led to the creation of enduring alliances like NATO, and transformed global security around the fear of nuclear annihilation. Even decades after it ended, the divisions, conflicts, and power structures it created continue to shape international politics today. During the war, fears that Nazi Germany might develop an atomic weapon pushed the United States to launch the Manhattan Project, a secret program that transformed nuclear science into a tool of warfare. This effort culminated in the first atomic test in July 1945, and weeks later, the bombs dropped on Hiroshima, and Nagasaki revealed a level of destructive power the world had never seen before. The immediate impact was catastrophic. Entire sections of both cities were wiped out in seconds, killing tens of thousands instantly and leaving many more to suffer from severe burns and radiation sickness in the weeks that followed. The devastation forced Japan's surrender and brought World War II to an end, but it also introduced humanity to a new and terrifying form of warfare. The long-term consequences reshaped global security forever. Nuclear weapons turned war between major powers into a question of survival itself, driving an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union and creating a world defined by deterrence and the constant threat of annihilation. Even today, the shadow of the nuclear age continues to shape international politics, military strategy, and the fragile balance of power between nations. After the devastation of the war, world leaders recognized that the old system for maintaining peace had failed. The League of Nations had been unable to prevent global conflict, and the scale of destruction in World War II convinced governments that a stronger international organization was needed to stop another catastrophe from happening. In 1945, representatives from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to draft and sign the United Nations Charter, formally creating the UN later that year. The organization was designed to provide a system of collective security, where countries could resolve disputes diplomatically and act together to prevent acts of aggression. The long-term impact of the United Nations has been the creation of a permanent global forum for diplomacy and cooperation. While it has not ended war, the UN has shaped the post-war international order, influenced peacekeeping efforts, humanitarian aid, and international law, and remains central to how the world attempts to manage conflict and protect human rights today. The war left major imperial powers like Britain, France, and the Netherlands economically weakened and unable to maintain control over vast overseas territories. At the same time, nationalist movements across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean gained momentum, as colonial populations who had contributed to the war effort demanded self-determination and independence. In the years after 1945, waves of new nations emerged as European empires retreated. Countries such as India, Indonesia, and later dozens of African states gained independence, sometimes through negotiation and sometimes through violent conflict. The authority of European rule had been broken, and the idea of empire rapidly lost legitimacy on the world stage. The long-term consequences of decolonization reshaped global politics. Dozens of new states entered the international system, dramatically expanding the United Nations and shifting the balance of power away from Europe. While independence brought freedom, many post-colonial nations also faced economic instability, contested borders, and Cold War intervention. Challenges that continue to influence global relations today. The war shattered the power of traditional European empires, leaving countries like Britain, France, and Germany economically exhausted and politically weakened. In their place, two new giants emerged. The United States came out of the war with its homeland untouched, a booming industrial economy and unmatched technological power, while the Soviet Union, despite enormous losses, expanded its military influence across Eastern Europe. The United States used its economic strength to shape the post-war world, rebuilding Western Europe through the Marshall Plan and positioning itself as the leader of the capitalist democratic bloc. At the same time, the Soviet Union consolidated control over Eastern Europe, establishing a network of communist satellite states and rapidly developing its own nuclear weapons, transforming it into a rival superpower almost overnight. This shift created a bipolar world order dominated by two opposing powers. With Europe no longer at the center of global politics, international influence became concentrated in Washington and Moscow. The rivalry between these superpowers would define global affairs for decades, shaping alliances, conflicts, and the political landscape of the modern world. In the aftermath of the war, the continent was split into two opposing spheres of influence. The Soviet Union established control over Eastern Europe, while the United States and its allies shaped the political and economic recovery of Western Europe. This divide became known as the Iron Curtain, an ideological and physical boundary that separated the communist East from the democratic West. Germany became the clearest symbol of this division. The country was split into occupation zones, and even its capital, Berlin, was divided between East and West, despite being deep inside Soviet-controlled territory. Over time, this separation hardened into fortified borders, surveillance, and walls that restricted movement and communication across much of Europe. The long-term consequences of a divided Europe shaped the Cold War era. Entire generations grew up on opposite sides of a political and economic divide, living under vastly different systems. Although the Iron Curtain began to fall in 1989, the legacy of this division continues to influence European politics, security, and relations between East and West today. Thanks for watching. This was part 2 in the series. The next video breaks down the consequences of the Cold War.